Hello, my name's Helen Paynter. I'm Director of the Centre for the Study of Bible and Violence, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you. I'm very sorry I can't be with you, but as you meet, I will be on sabbatical. So I've been asked to speak about Christian nationalism, and particularly thinking about the challenge that it poses to the church in this country. So a few thoughts, obviously not everything I could say, but I'll try and say something useful in 15 minutes. I need a definition so that we are all on the same sheet. So this definition is the one that I use. It's come from the American context, but it works very well in our own, and as long as you take out the US specific language. So Christian nationalism is a cultural framework, a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with national civic life. And very importantly, the Christianity of Christian nationalism represents something more than religion. It is as ethnic and political as it is religious. So hopefully this is roughly what you were expecting me to say when I said I was going to talk about Christian nationalism. People use the term in different ways, and not everybody who says I'm a Christian nationalist is saying something problematic in my view, but I think most of us probably would agree that the conflation of Christianity with Englishness or whiteness or some combination of those things is indeed problematic. Now, this is my best understanding of how this movement is being driven forward right now, at least as it relates to the church. So we've got two different sets of actors who are seeing in each other something that they can use to their own advantage. Now, obviously, political actors, as you can see on the right, can be Christians. So it is not quite as simple as I'm saying, but I'm hoping that this will kind of make sense. So we've got certain political actors who see in the church, who see in Christianity something that will lend them perhaps plausibility, credibility, maybe will grow their platform, and so on. And then there are certain prominent Christians who see in these political movements the opportunity to gain power or influence. Now, whether that's sort of personal growth in social media profile or wealth, or whether that's something less cynical and more to do with desiring to see the church grow. I'm not interested in commenting on motives, and I think these things are often quite mixed. But I think these two groups see in each other something that they can benefit from, and in my view, they cynically mutually co-opt each other. And then they sort of generate a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems. That's the quotation from the previous slide. And they promote this to the general population. And in so doing, they kind of leverage some of the great fractures in our own population. Hopelessness and financial precarity and loss of identity and fear of rapid social change and all the things that we know people in this country, some people in this country are experiencing, get kind of weaponized in the promotion of this kind of cultural myth and narrative system. And then susceptible members of the general public will buy this. And the people who typically will buy this, at least as in this particular dynamic is playing out, are certain believing Christians and certain cultural Christians, who are people who appreciate some of the frameworks and structures and traditions of the Christian faith, but wouldn't say that they have a personal allegiance to Jesus Christ. So this is how I think it's playing out in parts of our nation at the moment. So some challenges, and here's my first challenge to us, the church in England and Britain. We need to respond to the polarisation that is really evident in our culture at the moment without making it worse. So this is a model which I'm going to use over the next few slides, so I'll just take a moment to explain it. If we think about any of the polarising issues that are active for us right now, and I'm going to list them in a few minutes, but if we just think about any of them right now, I think we can agree that not everybody has to have exactly the same perspective on those polarising issues. In fact, if everybody in the country did say they had the same perspective, we probably wouldn't be living in a liberal democracy. The very nature of a liberal democracy is a certain amount of pluralism about certain beliefs. So we can have two different opinions which still would fairly be called moderate opinions. They don't agree with one another, but they are both opinions that are fair enough within a liberal democracy. But there are more extreme versions of those opinions. And for the sake of just something to call them, I'm going to call those the people who are extremes on either the right or the left, as I've set up this image. And they hold opinions or want to kind of enforce those opinions in a way that would put them outside the confines of liberal democracy. So I hope that makes sense. That's the kind of model that I want us to work with as we think about what's going on in our country right now. So one of the things I'm seeing quite a lot is people whose opinions I would consider moderate, referring to other people whose opinions I would also consider moderate as extremes. And then the exact same thing happening in the opposite direction. So I'm seeing a lot of moderate right-leaning people saying about moderate left-leaning people that they're extreme left, and exactly the same thing happening in reverse. And the way this, I think, is working is that it is the extremes who are, as it were, whispering to their own moderates, pointing to the moderates on the other side of the spectrum and saying they are extremes. So the people who are extremes on both ends are driving this polarization. And if I, as a moderate on one of these matters, speak to somebody who is also a moderate on this matter, but is the other side of the political spectrum from me, and if I say to them, you are far left or you are far right, they are not going to move towards me warmly and generously. They're going to probably start calling me names as well and actually move further apart. So one of the great challenges for all people of goodwill, but I'm speaking right now about the churches, one of our great challenges is not feeding into or not buying into this promotion of polarization in this way. Now, as a challenge then to people on both sides of the political spectrum, and I'm calling them, for the sake of a title, I'm calling them progressives and conservatives. That's not a political label. That's a description of ideological or theological stance. And if we reflect on the temptations of Jesus, which could be, I think, summarized as turn these stones into bread is a temptation to feed the crowd. I think that's fairly well understood. So this is a temptation, if you like, to seek popularity, and one might even say populism. Throw yourself off the temple is a temptation, perhaps we might say, to spectacle over substance. This is a temptation to command a quick audience and get everyone's attention without doing the hard, without walking those hard roads up and down the country and spending time with people. And then the third temptation, all these nations can be yours if only you bow down and worship me, is the temptation to idolatry in the pursuit of power. Now, in my view, Christians on both sides of the political spectrum are susceptible to those temptations. So the temptation of popularity and populism plays out on the progressive end in something about the power of shaming, I think, the way that shaming functions among particularly online communities, but not just there. And on the other side, with the attraction of political power, the desire to gain power, perhaps by making kind of dodgy political alliances. The second temptation, spectacle over substance, can play out on the left with desire for the social justice fruits of Christianity without interest in its theological roots. And on the other side, the desire for the traditions of Christianity and some of the ethics and morals of Christianity without discipleship. And similarly, the temptation to power and idolatry plays out at both ends, with people putting far too much trust in either a political leader or simply in a political movement. The Green Party, for example, will not save you. Only Jesus Christ will save you. Nigel Farage, for example, will not save you. Only Jesus Christ will save you. And then I would like to suggest as a bonus fourth point that both sides struggle a bit. This is all, of course, generalizing, but both sides struggle a bit with empathy. And those on the right tend to struggle with empathy towards people who have recently arrived in this country, and perhaps people who don't look like most of us. And people on the left struggle, in my view, with empathy towards those who have generationally lived with significant disadvantage and disenfranchisement in our own country. Okay, well, I've offended enough people. I'm going to move on. Now, if we think then about what it might mean to remove the plank from our own eyes, in my view, this is a challenge then to moderates, not to extremes. And the challenge is for moderates to take the argument to their own wing, to the extremes on their own side, call them out for taking reasonable and moderate opinions and making them something hateful or intolerant. And if we do that, which in my view is what it means to remove the plank from our own eye, then that opens up the possibility of generative and generous dialogue across the political divide. So the next challenge then, don't drive right-leaning Christians into reform or these other parties. On the left of the slide, I'm not going to go right through them for the sake of time, but you can pause it or get the PowerPoint and muse on this at your leisure. But on the left-hand side, I've listed a variety of right-leaning opinions and ideologies, which it is, in my view, entirely reasonable to hold within a liberal democracy. Whether or not I agree with them, they can be held in moderate ways. On the right-hand side are the far more extreme versions of those same ideologies and opinions. And these are divisive, hateful, and sometimes violent. And our challenge, in my view, is to address people who hold the left-hand set of opinions and not make them feel like we are calling them extremes in the way that I hope the previous diagram helped us to understand, and to help them to find ways of articulating and holding those beliefs without being pushed to become more extreme, without being pushed into the arms of some of these more troubling political expressions of these movements. And to help us think about that, it is worth thinking about what the appeal is to Christians to these movements. And many Christians are troubled by a loss of Christian visibility in society and by the growth in Islam, challenged by changes around end-of-life trends and same-sex marriage and trans rights and so on. And many of these concerns are entirely reasonable. Whether or not we agree with them, they are reasonable things to be concerned about within a liberal democracy. Another challenge, I'm aware that I'm running out of time. We need to face up to the fractures in our society. These movements, so it's certainly not simply the white disadvantaged who are buying into these movements, but they are very attractive to such people. And we need to think about the structural issues which make the scapegoating of immigrants, for example, so attractive to certain groups in our society. Another challenge is for us to immunise our congregations. There are some thin theologies being promoted right now. But what I mean by that is simply slogans, images and slogans that have no theological depth or content. How can we help our congregations to smell a rat? You see, when I see the banner Christ is King, I mean, I believe Christ is King. I also believe that is public truth that we should be prepared to testify to publicly at the right time and in the right way. But how can we help our congregations to realise that some of these are being used cynically and in thin ways that don't carry the depth of theological meaning that they have when we use them, for example, in our churches? And to help with this, we need to think about biblical and theological literacy and how we grow that in our congregations and how we help our congregations to develop in critical thinking and in cultural literacy too. I would also suggest that a challenge is that we respond appropriately to thicker theologies. So in other words, more developed theologies. So there are a number of well-developed articulations of Christian nationalism out there. And here are some examples, some of the ways that these stories are told. Now, it is not good enough to respond to people who have thoughtfully put together an argument, even if we disagree with that argument. It's not good enough just to simply label them as bigots or racists or whatever, or try and slogan our way out of responding to that. So this is the challenge for the theologians in our nation right now, to step up and to offer good, mature, thick responses to thick ideologies of Christian nationalism, to well articulated, carefully argued ideologies of Christian nationalism. We need to not collapse this into a single problem. There are lots of different issues at play right now, and they all deserve good theological reflection. For example, what is the significance of this moment? Is this a threat or an opportunity, or some combination of that? There are lots of separate questions. They relate to one another, but they deserve independent theological examination, so that we don't simply homogenize the opinions and the polarization, and we don't collapse all the different nuances of these movements into a single thing. Really important that we respond with nuance and grace, as well as confidence and wisdom. And a challenge to Christians on both sides of the political divide. Let's try not to overreact when we hear things that we don't like. Let's not mirror the behaviour of our opponents. Let's not deny what is evidently true in the pursuit of what we consider to be a good goal. Let's not respond to a politicization of the Christian message with our own politicization, our own kind of counter politicization. Let's learn to seek to understand, build bridges, and not dig ditches. We don't need to make up a new story. We can have confidence in the gospel in our day. And finally, I'll just draw your attention to two books that might be of interest. The one on the left is one I published a few years ago. It's an edited collection of papers around this question. And the one on the right is a toolkit for pastoral leaders, and that's going to be published in June of this year. I hope that has been of help.